I want to know how many conversations it takes you to convert something, right? Because that becomes a skill metric, not just an activity metric. That I have a little bit of a unique background for sales ops because I started as a seller. Here I was going door to door selling copy machines, kind of worked my way up on the sales side, got into sales leadership, did some project management work, and then found my way into sales ops. And when it was first really becoming popular. So I think I look at it a little bit more from a sales rep's perspective in that, I can take what leadership wants to do and bring it down to the rep level and make it as easy on them as possible, right? And so, what you don't want to do is burden sales reps with too many processes, too many technologies, too many things that distract them from selling. So I would say on the sales side, on the rep side, I focused on keeping things as easy as possible. And then on the manager side and even the leadership side, giving them the simple, easy to use tools that when they ask the question, they don't have to dig for the answer. They can go right somewhere, then they get the answer or they get the guidance that they need to go find the next answer. So it's trying to make them as efficient as possible.
That's really good. And what would you say, like being a salesperson yourself, the main issue or the main reason why it's hard to understand the metrics and like the full picture behind it?
Yeah, so there's a great book called Four Disciplines of Execution. It changed the way that I probably led ever since. And it's a really simple book, but it talks about leading and lag indicators, right? And I don't think we do a great job of connecting the two when we discuss them with salespeople. They feel it's punitive when we say make 50 calls a day, or you got to be on the phone for 2 hours, or send so many emails, or talk to so many unique prospects. They view it as it's a random. I don't know when call one or call 20 is going to generate the sale, but as soon as I get there, I want to stop.
Hmm.
We know that it's consistent effort that gets them there, but I don't think we do a great job of connecting the two together. And I think some people get so focused on the results that there's a luck factor in sales. There's an art factor, but there's a luck factor too. But if you do consistent, steady activity, you should maintain steady, consistent numbers. And I think it's our job to help them see that. I don't think the reps view it that way. I think they view a lot of the stuff we do, like all their emails logging to Salesforce, all their calls logging, as punitive and not as much as is helpful.
Mm, that makes a lot of sense. So it's quite hard to understand why you're asking them to log what they're doing.
Yeah, well, it's at some point, they think it's a lack of trust, right? Like,
Hmm.
it'd be like having a kid and saying, "I need your cell phone on. I need to know everywhere you're going, everywhere
Hmm.
you're doing. You have to check in at all times." They want to feel like check in with me if there's a problem, but otherwise let me do my job. You hired me to do it. With the technology that we have today, it makes it easy to digest this information into Salesforce with tools like Outreach and SalesLoft and
Hmm.
Chorus and all of these great, plugins to Salesforce. And Salesforce has grown so much. So it's easy to take the information in and use it for coaching opportunities. But I think we often get it wrong as sales leaders that we don't point out enough of the good conversations, but we
Mm.
only focus on the bad. And so again, it feeds that punitive cycle of you're ingesting all this information, you're only using it for negative coaching. Like I'd love to see the positive side of it as well. And I don't think
Mm.
we do a good enough job of that in our profession.
That's really cool. So like you want to change the image of metrics.
Yeah, yeah, and it's we had a sales leader here. He's a brilliant guy, and he takes the metrics and shows them in a way that's digestible for the reps. That shows here's where you are,
Hmm.
here's where you want to be, and let me show you how to get there, and connects it back to the activity. And the buy-in, the adoption is quite a bit stronger than just using it just to say, hey, you missed today. What'd you do wrong today?
Hmm.
And I think that's what a lot of the times we do is we look at the metrics as black and white. You hit it or you missed it, and
Mm.
assuming if somebody missed it, they've done something, or better yet, they haven't done something that they should have done.
Mm. That's so cool. Okay, so thinking about the metrics then, Matt, what would you say is the core metrics to you and your function?
Yeah, so and you mentioned the soccer thing, but I'm also a huge baseball fan. So baseball baseball operations is really similar to sales operations because you have all of this statistical analysis,
Mhm.
and it's your job to sift through it and figure out what matters, right? And so in baseball, you're airing this in the US, people get it, maybe not so much in England. But it was batting average and ERA, and those are good indicators. But what it doesn't account for is luck and the pitchers that you're facing. And if you're a great pitcher and you have a terrible defense, so there's all these advanced metrics that try to go beyond that. And so I think a lot of times in sales ops, we focus on, hey, did you make 50 calls a day? Did you close X number of deals and did you generate Y number of revenue, right? And when you look at that, that's okay. Luck, a large deal really skews the metrics. And so we try to go a layer deeper and connecting again, leading indicators to lag and saying, I want to know for every conversation you have, how much revenue that generates. For every conversation you have, how many deals does it generate? On the SDR side, I want to know how many conversations it takes you to convert something, right? Because that becomes a skill metric, not just an activity metric, right? And so what we see when we look at this is that the more contacts it takes to conversion typically means somebody that's afraid to close for commitment, and more than likely somebody that's not getting to the point quick enough, right? And those are coachable things. And what metrics, there's a great book, Sales Acceleration Formula, that talks about metric driven sales coaching.
Mhm.
And it's the idea that you can peer into metrics for it to tell you a story, but that just diagnoses the problem. You as a leader have to dig in and see if the metric is telling you what it is. And if it is doing that, now you've got a really focused area to do the coaching. So that's really where we like to do it from the rep side of it.
Mm. So a skill metric. That is really cool. I like the way you've articulated that. Okay, so I think you've touched upon training. What do you think the main focus for these metrics are? Is it to drive a certain strategy? Is it to drive a certain initiative, or is it more for coaching in general?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of what happens in sales, and I've been a part of the top down, I've been part of the bottom up, and I've been part of the mid level where I've gotten from the top down and I've got to push it down.
Hmm.
What I've seen more often than not is that our sales is all about growth, right? And so the board needs to see growth. So leadership says we've got to grow 20%. And so whatever the number is, they take it, they add 20% to it, and they say, go hit it, right? And then
Hmm.
where most of it starts is at whether you call it the top of the funnel or the bottom of the funnel, is that we've got a revenue target. Okay. What is our win rate? What is our conversion rate? What's the addressable market, right? And you go both ways and say, okay, here's where we need to be. How do we get there, right? And so
Hmm.
typically it takes a lag, like way far out lag measure, and then you go and you build it all the way back up to the sales side. And so it's a matter of spacing it out and getting it to a point where it's digestible. And I think ultimately it's to drive behavior,
Hmm.
right? And so it's to drive behavior towards the ultimate goal of the company. And that's the, from the mid-level up. And I think down to the rep level, it's saying, okay, we know where we need to be. How do we use the metrics to coach you to get to the level that we need you to be at? Because I think goal setting is something, it even goes back to like behavior economics, right? Where
Hmm.
you set a target and where you set a goal, you're leading them to drive to that behavior. And you've got to be really careful what that behavior is, because you're typically what you measure and how you measure it, especially from a sales compensation standpoint, is the
Hmm.
results that you're going to get. And the behaviors behind that will lead to what the goal is set forth for, right? And I see it all the time where accelerators are a really good thing, but when a
Hmm.
rep knows they get into that territory, they max it out. They know they can't get there in a next month. They may sandbag a little bit, right, to play the game, especially if it's on a monthly basis. And what salespeople are exceptionally good at is figuring out the way to make the system work best for them. And
Hmm.
bravo to them, right? And that's where we as ops people have to be really cognizant of what the goal is, what the targets are, and how we get there, because the system will be exploited to the sales reps' benefit. And
Hmm.
that benefits us, so as long as that we set up the system for success.
I like that. Do you think this insight comes from the fact that you was a salesperson before?
Yeah, I come from a family of salespeople. So my brother, sister, dad, brother-in-law, they're all in sales, and we always talk about these things. And I
Mhm.
remember it back to when I was in my first job in selling copy machines. A kid got real excited. He sold a deal in training, and I remember asking him, I'm like, "How much are you getting paid off of that?" And he said, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Isn't our job as sales is to make money?" And I
Mhm.
asked him, I said, "What are you getting paid?" And he said, "I'm in training. I don't get paid." And I'm like, "Then why didn't you wait 2 weeks to sell it?" And it's a little bit of we're money driven in sales, right? And that is a really great motivator, and it does drive behavior. It's just, again, you have to be careful of the way the plans and the way the targets are set up, is because people will maximize them for themselves versus what they're really intended to do.
Mm. Okay. So like with the say if you set a specific strategy and it's like set from like the top level or the bottom level, do you see any differences in like the metrics that have been chosen or the strategy that's been chosen?
Yeah, I think if you let it come from the top down, and you let sales executives set the things,
Mhm.
and people that I see it a lot with my boss. He's a brilliant man, but he can process so much information that he wants to measure and monitor everything. Sales reps do not process information at the same level he does, right? And so sometimes we overburden sales with metrics and new philosophies and new coaching techniques, and to the point of it's like overwhelming, right? And
Mhm.
instead of it driving better behavior, it almost paralyzes them a little bit, right? And I think that's one of the things that we have to be really careful of, that I think the four disciplines of execution does a great job of saying, is you can really only focus on one or two things, right? And generally that in sales, it's driving revenue
Mhm.
through activity and behavior, right? But I think sometimes we see what we see at the leadership level. Oh my
Mhm.
God, when you did this, this happened. Therefore, let's do more of this. And sometimes it contradicts what we're really trying to do, because we're not in the weeds enough. Now, we don't want to be, right? That's why you have really talented sales reps, and that's why they get paid really well. But I think sometimes the translation from executive down, we overburden them and saddle them with too many metrics. And
Mhm.
we do a little bit more of a paralysis than we really do from helping them achieve their goals.
Mm. Okay. So that does lead me on very nicely to the question of, if you feel like a metric's not working because the reps aren't understanding why that is, what do you do about changing the metrics? What's the process involved?
Yep. So the Kaizen method of just continuous improvement, right? I think that's a way of life, right? More
Mhm.
than it is. A lot of people say, "Oh yeah, give me feedback and we'll take it under advisement," and usually it doesn't work that way. I think where one of the things that I really love to do is build relationships at the management level and at the sales rep level. And
Mm.
the feedback that you get from sales is the most valuable, just like the feedback you get from customer service is the most valuable feedback that you can get for an enterprise, because you're hearing it directly from the customer, right? Our ideas are up here.
Mhm.
They don't always translate down to the customer level. And so I think when the reps feel comfortable and empowered to share their opinions, I think they'll provide the suggestions. And I think that's the bridge of when you realize the metric is not doing what it's intended to do, and you're getting enough feedback from people that you trust, that feel empowered to tell you. I think you have to, if you want to keep building those really and really solidifying those relationships, I think you have to be willing to change. And so I think there should always be a cycle of looking at, is what we're measuring, is it driving the conversation the way that we want it to, and is it leading to the results we want to? But I think there's an extra question, right, of how is it being translated to the actual rep, that it's being, that not forced upon, right, but it's
Mhm.
being intended to manage. And is it really becoming something that is helpful or burdensome, and letting that feedback loop be there, right? And I think without a feedback loop, both on a continuous improvement, whether it's once a month you review the metrics and see what they're doing, or soliciting feedback and saying, what, this was really well intended, but it's not accomplishing the objective. Let's sharpen our pencil. Let's change it. And I find when you do that, you get way more rep adoption and rep buy-in.
Mhm.
And that's more powerful than forcing something down from the top.
Mm. Okay. So, have you had any kind of mistakes where you thought this was a really great metric, or this is a really good thing to implement, and then it hasn't worked, it hasn't landed very well?
Yeah, I mean, you in sales, you're going to make many mistakes. And I would say at a previous job, we had a young lady who we had an inbound line come in and we said, you have to be at 50 dials a day. You
Mm,
have to be at, around 10 contacts a day. You have to be this many deals submitted every day in order to earn the right to be on the line. And every month she would challenge, super brilliant girl. And she would challenge us and saying, I don't need to make as many calls as those guys to get to my number. Look at the revenue number, look at the number that matters, and look where I am versus they are. And every leading metric, she was the lowest in every
mm.
one of them, but she was the top revenue generator. And it caused us to step back and say, okay, so she has a different approach. And I think some can do it more qualitatively. And what she found out was the actual metric was revenue. And I know how to get my customers to generate more revenue
Mhm.
by having fewer of them, but more solid relationships and doing a better job of qualifying. And so that opened our eyes to, okay, maybe we're not doing this right on our end, and maybe we need to be a little bit better about how we set these metrics.
Mm. So that makes sense actually, because what you said before about skill metrics, digging into how many conversations are actually meaningful and helps that rep convert. So
Yes.
that makes a lot of sense. And so, Matt, how would you say you bridge that massive operations tactical to strategic divide? How would you say what would you say your philosophies are there?
Yeah. So I've spent time in sales,
Hmm.
leadership. I've done M&A a little bit, project management. I've done marketing automation, and so I've heard all the conversations and I know how they happen. And I think what helps me is, marketing is tasked with X, sales is Y, and you've got to read between the lines a little bit, right? We're saying the same
Hmm.
thing. In the scenario that we're in today, marketing is tasked with generating volume to inbound. Inbound is generating conversions of the activity, right? And those
Hmm.
seem very similar.
Hmm.
The disconnect is in how the conversation gets started, right? Just because somebody fills out a form doesn't guarantee a conversation. Just because a
Hmm.
lead is sent to us, what we really care about is connecting buyer to rep through conversations. And I think from that standpoint, where I can help bridge the gap is I can see the metrics, I understand what marketing's initiatives are, I understand what sales initiatives are. I can go between marketing ops and sales apps, marketing leadership, sales leadership, down to the rep level to take it and find a way to make our technologies work to
Hmm.
do what we really are intended to do, right? And it goes back to the conversation metric. I don't care how many calls you make or
Mm.
emails you send, right? What I want to know is marketing generating conversations and is sales converting conversations, right? That is what we're trying to do. We're trying to connect to people and have the greatest, efficiency in those connections leading to sales. So I think it's really, peeling it back and figuring out what you're really trying to get to.
Hmm. Do you have any, like, other than talking to your sales reps, what methods do you have to peel back and see like what the true story is behind a metric and what's happening?
Yeah, so we look a lot at high level conversions, and I
Hmm.
think one of the things that I got a couple of people on my team that do data, and what I try to teach them is and this is a personal method. It may be
Mm.
wildly wrong, so but this is the way that I like to do it. Is I like to come in with an opinion or hypothesis, right? And I also have to be willing, right? It goes back to this like Kaizen mentality of like, I need to dig somewhere, right? I need the metric to tell me something. I
Hmm.
need that to generate a hypothesis, but I also need to dig in to tell me if that's really what's happening. And I think once you really dig into that second or third layer, you're figuring out. So we look at, for example, we look at lead sources by conversions.
Hmm.
It's a useful metric, right? Because that tells us ROI. It helps us with all of these great things, but what we're finding out is there's something that's happening between lead submission and conversion. If I
Hmm.
just look at conversion, does that tell me the whole story? So we looked back up and say, how many of these are actually leading to conversations? And what we found was certain lead sources drive better conversations.
Mhm.
Some it is you don't have to follow up immediately. Some you do. And so then our job as sales ops is not just to measure it,
Mhm.
it's to figure out how to connect to the customer quicker through things like automation and technology. And when the form is submitted, we automatically dial them versus it going into an outreach sequence, right? And so our job is to look at that saying, okay, why is conversion down? I think it's down because our sales reps are poor. Well, actually, when I look at conversions to our contacts conversion, it's really good. So what my next thought is, how do I get them to have more conversations? Well,
Mhm.
okay, we know that when this lead comes in, 5 other people are calling it. So I need to figure out a way to get them on the phone first.
Mm.
And so that's where not stopping at a certain level, like digging deeper with that hypothesis and letting either it prove itself true or false, but either way, continuing to dig into it to figure out what the ultimate solution is. And I think a lot of people stop at, hey, your conversion is not good enough here, either pull the investment or change the rep out or change the process or train
Mhm.
versus really digging in one layer deeper to figure out, hey, they're doing a really exceptional job of converting these. They're just
Mm.
not able to get many of them on the phone.
Mm. That makes sense. So have a hypothesis, dig in deep, and try and figure out what the true story is and what's actually going on, as
Yep,
opposed to just trying to see what's happening and then taking some training or doing something else.
that's right.
Perfect. I like that. Okay, so Matt, final question for you. Right, if you was in a room full of revenue leaders, what's that one question that you'd want an answer to?
That's a good question. I think what I've been learning more about just reading and what makes things successful is why, right?
Mhm.
In Simon Sinek has a great book, Start with Why, and I feel like we miss that piece, right? We push things down
Mhm.
without really telling us why we're going after this, right? What's our ultimate objective? Why are we going after what we're going after, right? And I think sometimes we miss capturing people's hearts
Mm.
because we just say this is what it is, and sales reps stop feeling like a part of a solution. When I had my sales team where I was a leader, our goal was we had a mission statement. It was to hire, train, and develop the best sales reps we can so that they continue to help the company grow and achieve its objectives, right? So it wasn't ever focused on revenue or metrics. It was focused
Mhm.
on hiring, training, and retaining the best talent because what we were was the entry level sales group. If I hired the best and
Mhm.
trained them well and got them focused, they don't just make me money, they make the company money. And
Mhm.
our idea was that we want to change the company from the ground up. So we had a vision and we had a why of what we were doing. And every day it wasn't, oh, where am I at with my number today? It's how am I making myself better to
Mhm.
help the company, right? And I think sometimes we miss capturing the hearts by not telling people why we're doing what we're doing.
Mm. Okay. So starting with the why, I like that. I like the fact that you like Simon Sinek as well.
Yeah.
Is there any like final pieces of advice that you'd want to give a revenue leader with anything related to metrics or anything in general, thinking back to any mistakes that you've made that you've just taken with you the rest of your career?
Yeah, I would say the one thing that I consistently see people make mistakes is we have great tools. We like our tech stack is phenomenal, but
Mhm.
Chorus and Outreach, Sales Loft, Gong, all of these tools are only as good as the people helping the people use them and the
Mm.
training and really the attention that you give them, right? Knowing what you're saying in a conversation, but not doing anything about it, knowing how many calls you're making without doing anything about it. I think we have gotten to this point. I mean, we live in this data driven world today, right? Where data is at our fingertips. We have so much of it. I don't think we always know why we're doing what we're doing.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes we think employing a new training program and implementing a new technology will automatically drive results. But going back to the sports analogy, the we'll use soccer, right? And you
Yeah.
guys, Harry Kane is your guy up top, right? He
Mhm.
doesn't score goals unless and really ultimately win the game, right?
Mhm.
Unless the people in the midfield battle and win those battles, right? And the people inside and everybody functioning and executing at their level, we look at the guy at the top of the leaderboard saying we need more of him. And it's
Mhm.
not really the way it works, right? You need people every single day grinding, doing the dirty work, because that's really what produces the results. And that's what makes the people look like stars, right? And I think we miss that point that we think the new technology or the new training is just automatically going to generate results, and it's still down to the people, right? Because the
Hmm.
people, not me, not you, not any leader, is not the one on the phone with the salesperson or with the customer, right?
Mm.
It's the sales rep, and it's getting them to transfer that energy of them knowing why, them focused on the right things. That's ultimately what drives results,
Hmm.
not uploading their emails into a server and not tracking their calls, right? Those can be great coaching and teaching moments. But I don't think we use it that. I think we just use it as another information point to say somebody is successful or isn't, and
Hmm.
we start to bucket people versus really using them to drive change.
Mm. I like that point. See, if you don't focus on the people, it goes back to what you said before about metrics feeling like it's a punishment, them having to
Yeah,
do 50 calls because to see if they're actually doing work.
that's right.
That's really great. And it sounds like you do a lot of reading. Do you have any books that you'd like to recommend?
The one that I just read recently was really interesting to me, and it's called Range.
Hmm.
Um, and the premise is we all went into this Malcolm Gladwell outliers, 10 years, 10,000 hours, that if you get somebody at 2 years old and you train them specifically in one discipline, that they will achieve extraordinary results. And I think we kind of adopted that, right? And I've coached soccer here for a long time, and it was, God, the kid is good at 7. What if we would have got him at 4 and started him at 3? And where could they be today? And this book challenges to say, while you need specialized people, I think
Hmm.
what we're missing is the fact that generalists can connect broader things, right? Because when a specialist gets so myopic in looking at something, they can't connect it back to a real world experience or connect it back to something somebody understands because they only know something so narrowly. And I think that broader perspectives, and I think where that starts to translate into is the best salesperson should spend a little time in customer service or in account
Mm.
management and doing some of these other things because they're so focused on getting something done, they don't really ever step back and look at how it affects the business, right? And leaders do the same thing, focused on their narrow path. And I think it's a really great message in a world where we have the ability to go hyper specialization. And I think
Mhm.
that's still okay. But reading or experiencing and traveling in different cultures, that all helps you broaden your perspective and broaden your range, to the point of this book. And I think that's really, really brilliant. And then the other one that I just read recently was Measure What Matters. And one of the great things the book talks about is as you do forecasting, there's going to be variables that you know and
Mhm.
variables that you don't know. And what you need to do is really rank these variables of importance and
Mhm.
impact, and then also certainty, right? And if you go into a forecast
Mhm.
with your most important variable that will have the biggest impact, that's the most uncertain, the likelihood of you getting closer to hitting that forecast is going to be a lot lower, right? So you got to start with the variables that you know to be absolutely true,
Mhm.
and then you can forecast off of those. But I think a lot of people miss that and say, hey, they said hit 20 million, so that means 40 million calls. That
Mhm.
means, your addressable market is 2 billion. And then you look at it and your addressable market is 1 billion. So what do you do at that point, right? Where
Mhm.
you go and you start to manipulate metrics to say, well, we can't do more than the addressable market. So clearly we have to convert at twice the rate that we're doing today.
Mm.
Well, that's great because on paper it gets you to the number that you're wanting, but it's just really not achievable. So I think those are two really great books that boil a lot down. And I would recommend that anybody read Four Disciplines of Execution.
Mhm.
And before we try to change the world, we should focus on one or two things and change those first.
Mm. That's really great. Thanks, Matt.